was no way it could possibly be real. I have, and I want to tell you about it. I've never told anyone this before, and it's a long story, so strap in. It all happened when I was 12. Let me paint the scene for you, so it's like you were there. That way, you can feel what happened to me, as if it's happening now. That's the only way you'll truly understand what I experienced. Here it goes. I love to scare my little brother Randy. I tell him scary stories about monsters until he begs me to stop. And I'm always teasing him by pretending to see monsters everywhere. I guess that's why no one believed me the day I saw a real monster. I guess that's why no one believed me until it was too late and the monster was right in my own house. But I'd better not tell the ending of my story at the beginning. My name is Lucy Dark. I'm 12. I live with my brother, Randy, who is 6, and my parents in a medium-sized house in a medium-sized town called Timberland Falls. I don't know why it's called Timberland Falls. There are a few forests outside of town, but no one cuts the trees down for timber, and there aren't any falls. So, why Timberland Falls? It's a mystery. We have a red brick house at the end of our street. There's a tall, overgrown hedge that runs along the side of our house and separates our yard from the Killing's yard next door. Dad's always talking about how we should trim the hedge, but he never does. We have a small front yard and a pretty big backyard with a lot of tall, old trees in it. There's an old sassafras tree in the middle of the yard. It's cool and shady under the tree. That's where I like to sit with Randy when there's nothing better to do and see if I can scare the socks off of him. It isn't very hard. Randy scares easy. He looks a lot like me, even though he's a boy. He's got straight black hair, just like me, only I wear mine longer. He's short for his age, like me, and just a little bit chubby. He has a round face, rounder than mine, and big black eyes, which really stand out, since we both have such pale, white skin. Mom says Randy has longer eyelashes than mine, which makes me kinda jealous. But my nose is straighter and my teeth don't stick out as much when I smile. So I guess I shouldn't complain. Anyway, on a hot afternoon, a couple weeks ago, Randy and I were sitting under the old sassafras tree, and I was getting ready to scare him to death. I really didn't have anything better to do. As soon as summer came around this year and school let out, most of my really good friends went away for the summer. I was stuck at home, and so I was pretty lonely. Randy is usually a total pain, but at least he has somebody to talk to, and someone I can scare. I have a really good imagination. I can dream up the most amazing monsters, and I can make them sound really real. Mom says with my imagination, maybe I'll be a writer when I grow up. I really don't know about that. and starts shaking all over. The poor kid, I can't even make his teeth chatter. It's unbelievable. I leaned back against the smooth part of the tree trunk and rested my hands on the grass and closed my eyes. I was dreaming of a good story to tell my brother. The grass felt soft and moist against my bare feet. I dug my toes into the dirt. Randy was wearing denim shorts and a plain white sleeveless t-shirt. He was lying on his side, plucking off blades of grass with one hand. Did you ever hear about the Timberland Falls doe biter? I asked him, brushing a spider off my white tennis shorts. Huh? He kept pulling up blades of grass one by one, making a little pile. There was this monster called the Timberland Falls doe biter. I told Randy. Please, Lucy, you mind? You said you wouldn't make up any more monster stories. No, I'm not, I told him. This story isn't made up, it's true. He looked up at me and made a face. Yeah, sure. No, really, I insisted, staring hard into his round black eyes so he'd know I was sincere. This is a true story. It really happened. Here in Timberland Falls. Randy pulled himself up to a sitting position. I think I'll go outside and read comic books, he said, nosing down a handful of grass. Randy has a big comic book collection, but they're all Disney comics and Archie comics because the superhero comics are too scary for him. The doe biter showed up one day right next door. I told Randy. I knew once I started the story, he wouldn't leave. At the killings? He asked, his eyes growing wide. Yeah, he arrived in the middle of the afternoon. The doe biter isn't a night monster, you see. He's a day monster. He strikes when the sun is high in the sky, just like now. I pointed up through the shimmering tree leaves to the sun, which was high overhead in a clear summer blue sky. A day monster? Randy asked. He turned his head to look at the killings house, rising up on the other side of the hedge. Don't be scared. It happened a couple of summers ago. I continued. Becky and Lila were over there. They were swimming, you know, in that plastic pool their mom inflates for them. The one half the water always spills out of. And a monster came, Randy asked. A doe biter, I told him, keeping my expression very serious and lowering my voice nearly to a whisper. A doe biter came crawling across their backyard. Where did he come from? Randy asked, leaning forward. I shrugged. No one knows. You see, the thing about doe biters is they're very hard to see when they crawl across grass, because they make themselves the exact color of the grass. You mean they're green? Randy asked, rubbing his pudgy nose. I shook my head. They're only green when they creep and crawl over the grass, I replied. They change their color to match what they're walking on, so you can't see them. Well, how big is it? Randy asked thoughtfully. Big, I said. Bigger than a dog. I watched an ant crawl up my leg, then flicked it off. No one really knows how big because this monster blends in so well. So what happened? Randy asked, sounding a little breathless. I mean, to Becky and Lila. Again, he glanced over at the Killing's gray shingle house. Well, they were in their little plastic pool, I continued, you know, splashing around, and I guess Becky was lying on her back and had her feet hanging over the side of the pool, and the monster scampered over the grass, nearly invisible, and it saw Becky's toes dangling in the air. And Becky didn't see the monster? Randy asked. I could see he was starting to get real pale and trembling. Doe biters are just so hard to see, I It didn't tickle so much. It started to hurt. Becky shouted for the dog to stop, but the hurting got even worse. It felt like the dog was chewing on her toes with very sharp teeth. It started to hurt a whole lot, so Becky sat up and pulled her feet into the pool. She saw it. I stopped and waited for Randy to ask. What? He asked finally, in a shaky voice. What did she see? I leaned forward and brought my mouth close to his ear. The toes were missing from her left foot, I whispered. No, Randy screamed. He jumped to his feet. He was as pale as a ghost, and he looked really scared. That's not true. I shook my head solemnly. I forced myself not to crack a smile. Ask Becky to take off her left shoe, I told him. You'll see. No, you're lying, Randy wailed. Ask her, I said softly. And then I glanced down at my feet, and my eyes popped wide with horror. Randy, look, I stammered, and pointed with a trembling hand down to my feet. Randy uttered a deafening scream when he saw what I was pointing at. All the toes on my left foot were missing. Wait! Randy let out another terrified wail. Then he took off running full speed to the house, crying for Mom. I took off after him. I didn't want to get in trouble for scaring him again. Randy, wait, I'm okay, I shouted, laughing. Of course, I had my toes buried in the dirt. He should have been able to figure that out, but he was too scared to think straight. Wait, I called after him. I didn't get to show you the monster in the tree. He heard that. He stopped and turned around, his face still all twisted up in fright. Huh? There's a monster up in the tree, I said, pointing to the sassafras tree we'd just been sitting under. A tree monster. I saw it. No way, he screamed and started running again to the house. I'll show it to you, I called, cupping my hands around my mouth so he'd hear me. He didn't look back. I watched him stumble up the steps to the back stoop and disappear into the house. The screen door slammed hard behind him. I stood staring at the back of the house, waiting for Randy to poke his front head out again, but he didn't. I burst out laughing. I mean, the toe biter was one of my best creations. And then, digging my toes into the dirt and pretending the monster had gotten me too. What a riot. Poor Randy. He was just too easy a victim. And now, he was probably in the kitchen squealing on me to Mom. That meant that real soon I'd be in for another lecture about how it wasn't nice to scare my little brother and fill it full of scary monster stories. But what else was there to do? I stood there staring at the house, waiting for one of them to call me in. Suddenly, a hand grabbed my shoulder hard from behind. Gotcha, a voice growled. Oh, I cried out and nearly jumped out of my skin. A monster. I spun around and stared at the laughing face of my friend, Aaron Messer. Aaron giggled his high-pitched giggle till he had tears in his eyes. I shook my head, frowning. You didn't scare me, I insisted. Oh, sure, he replied, rolling his blue eyes. That's why you screamed for help. I didn't scream for help, I protested. I just cried out a little. In surprise, that's all. Aaron chuckled. You thought it was a monster, admit it. A monster, I said, sneering. Oh, why would I think that? Because that's all you think about, he said smugly. You're obsessed. Ooh, big word, I teased him. He made a face at me. Aaron is my only friend who stuck around this summer. His parents are taking him somewhere out west in a few months, but in the meantime, he's stuck like me, just hanging out, trying to fill the time. Aaron is about a foot taller than me, but who isn't? That's what Randy saw. I continued. That's what made him run, screaming into the house. You see monsters everywhere, Aaron said. Don't you ever get tired of it? I'm not kidding this time, I told him. My chin trembled and my expression turned to outright fear as I gazed over Aaron's shoulder at the broad, leafy sassafras tree. I'll prove it to you. Yeah, sure, Aaron replied with his usual sarcasm. Really? Go get that broom. I motioned to the broom leaning against the back of the house. Huh? What for? Aaron asked. Go get the broom, I insisted. We'll see if we can get the monster down from the tree. Why do we want to do that? Aaron asked. He sounded very hesitant. I could see that he was starting to wonder if I was being serious or not. So you'll believe me, I said seriously. I don't believe in monsters, Aaron replied. You know that, Lucy. Save your monster stories for Randy. He's just a kid. Will you believe me if one drops out of that tree? I asked. Nothing is going to drop out of that tree, except maybe some leaves, Aaron said. Go get the broom and we'll see, I said. Okay, fine. He went trotting toward the house. I grabbed the broom out of his hand when he brought it over. Come on, I said, leading the way to the tree. I hope the monster hasn't climbed away. Aaron rolled his eyes. I can't believe I'm going along with this. Lucy, I must be really bored. You won't be bored in a second, I promised. If the tree monster is still up there. We stepped into the shade of the tree. I moved close to the trunk and gazed up into its leafy green branches. Whoa, stay right there. I put my hand on Aaron's chest, holding him back. It could be dangerous. Give me a break, he muttered under his breath. I'll try to shake the branch and bring it down, I said. Let me get this straight, Aaron said. You expect me to believe that you're going to take the broom, shake a tree branch, and a monster is going to come tumbling down from up there? I could see that the broom handle wasn't quite long enough to reach. I'm going to have to climb up a little, I told Aaron. Just watch out, okay? Ooh, I'm shaking. I'm so scared, Aaron cried, making fun of me. I shifted the trunk and pulled myself onto the lowest limb. It took me a while because I had the broom in one hand. See any scary monsters up there? Aaron asked smugly. It's up there, I called down, fear creeping into my voice. It's trapped up there. It's very angry, I think. Aaron snickered. You're so dumb. I pulled myself up to a kneeling position on the limb. Then I raised the broom in front of me. I lifted it up to the next branch. Higher, higher. Holding on tightly to the trunk with my free hand, I raised the broom as far as it would go and pushed it against the tree limb. Success. I lowered my eyes immediately to watch Aaron. He let out a deafening shriek of horror as the monster toppled from the tree and landed right on his chest. Well, actually, it wasn't a monster that landed with a soft, gurgly thud on Aaron's chest. It was a ratty old bird's nest that some blue jays had built 2 springs ago. But Aaron wasn't expecting it, so it gave him a really good scare. Gotcha, I proclaimed after climbing down from the tree. He scowled at me. His face was a little purple, which made his freckles look really weird. You and your monsters, he muttered. That's exactly what my mom said about 10 minutes later. Gone home, and I'd come into the kitchen and pulled a box. Mom appeared Dad thinks this monster obsession is just a phase you're going through, but I'm not so sure. Life is just a phase I'm going through, I said softly. I thought it was pretty clever, but she just glared at me. Then she reminded me that if I didn't hurry, I'd be late for my Reading Rangers meeting. I glanced at the clock, as she was right. My appointment was for 4 o'clock. Reading Rangers is a summer reading program at the town library that Mom and Dad made me enroll in. They said they didn't want me to waste the whole summer, and if I joined this thing at the library, at least I'd read some good books. The way Reading Rangers works is I have to go see Mr. Mortman, the librarian, once a week, and I have to give a short report and answer some questions about the book I read that week. I get a gold star for every book I report on. If I get 6 gold stars, I get a prize. I think the prize is a book. Big deal, right? But it's just a way to make you read. I thought I'd read some of the scary mystery novels that all my friends are reading. But no way. Mr. Mortman insists on everyone reading classics. He means old books. I'm going to skate over, I told my mom, and hurried to my room to get my skates. You'd better fly over, my mom called up to me. Hey, she added a few seconds later. It looks like rain. She was always giving me weather reports. I passed by Randy's room. He was in there in the dark, no lights, the shades pulled, playing video games as usual. By the time I got my skates laced and tied, I had only 5 minutes to get to the library. Luckily, it was only 6 or 7 blocks away. I was in big trouble anyway. I had managed to read only 4 chapters of Huckleberry Finn, my book for the week. That meant I was going to have to fake it with Mr. Mortman. I picked the book up from my shelf. It was a new paperback. I wrinkled up some of the pages near the back to make it look as if I'd read that far. I tucked it into my backpack, along with a pair of sneakers. Then I made my way down the stairs, not easy in skates, and headed to the Timberland Falls Town Library. The library was in a ramshackle old house on the edge of the Timberland Woods. The house had belonged to some eccentric old hermit, and when he died he had no family, so he donated the house to the town. They turned it into a library. Some kids said the house had been haunted, but kids say that about every creepy old house. The library did look like a perfect haunted house, though. It was 3 stories tall, dark shingled, with a dark, pointy roof between 2 stone turrets. The house was set back in the trees as if hiding there. It was always in the shade, always dark and cold inside. Inside, the old floorboards creaked beneath a thin carpet the town had put down. The high windows let in very little light, and the old wooden bookcases reached nearly to the ceiling. When I edged my way through the narrow aisles between the tall, dark shelves, I always felt as if they were about to close in on me. I had this frightening feeling that the shelves would lean in on me, cover me up, and I'd be buried there in the darkness forever. Buried under 1,000 pounds of dusty, mildewy old books. But, of course, that's silly. It was just a very old house. Very dark, damp, very creaky. Not as clean as a library should be. Lots of cobwebs and dust. Mr. Mortman did his best, I guess, but he was kind of creepy too. The thing all of us kids hated the most about him was that his hands always seemed to be wet. He would smile at you with those beady little black eyes of his lighting up on his plump, bald head. He would reach out and shake your hand, and his hand was always sopping. When he turned the pages of books, he'd leave wet fingerprints on the corners. His desktop always had small puddles on the top, moist handprints on the leather desk protector. He was short and round. with that shiny, bald head and those tiny black eyes. He looked a lot like a mole. Hey, wet pod mole. He spoke in a high, scratchy voice, and nearly always whispered. He wasn't a bad guy, really. He seemed to like kids. He wasn't mean or anything, and he really liked books. He was just weird, that's all. He sat on a tall wooden stool that made him hover over his enormous desk. He kept a deep aluminum pan on the side of his desk. Inside the pan were several little turtles moving around in about an inch of water. My timid friends, I heard him call them once. Sometimes he'd pick up one of them and hold it in his pudgy fingers high in the air until it tucked itself into its shell. Then he'd gently set it down, a pleased smile on his pale, flabby face. He sure loved his turtles. I guess they were okay as pets, but they were kind of smelly. I always tried to sit on the other side of the desk, as far away from the turtle pan as I could get. Well, I skated to the library as fast as I could. I was only a few minutes late. When I skated into the cool shade of the library driveway, the sky was clouding over. I sat down on the stone steps and pulled off the skates. Then I quickly slid into my sneakers, and carrying my skates, I walked through the front door. Making my way through the stacks, the tall, narrow shelves at the back of the main reading room, I dropped the skates against the wall. Then I walked quickly through the aisles to Mr. Mortman's desk against the back wall. He heard my footsteps and immediately glanced up from the pile of books he was stamping with a big rubber stamp. The ceiling light made his bald head shine like a lamp. He smiled. Hi, Lucy, he said in his squeaky voice. Be right with you. I said hi and sat down in the folding chair in front of his desk. I watched him stamp the books. He was wearing a gray turtleneck sweater, which made him look a lot like his pet turtles. Finally, after glancing at the big, loudly ticking clock on the wall, he turned to me. And what did you read for Reading Rangers this week, Lucy? He leaned over the desk toward me. I could see wet fingerprints on the dark desktop. Huckleberry Finn. I pulled the book from my backpack and dropped it into my lap. Yes, a wonderful book, Mr. Mortman said, glancing at the paperback in my lap. Don't you agree? Yes, I said quickly. I really enjoyed it. I couldn't put it down. That was sort of true. I never picked it up, so how could I put it down? What did you like best about Huckleberry Finn? Mr. Mortman asked, smiling at me expectantly. The description, I told him. I had my Reading Rangers gold star in my t-shirt pocket, and I had a new book in my backpack, Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. Maybe I'll read Frankenstein out loud to Randy, I thought evilly. That would probably make his teeth chatter forever. The late afternoon sun was hidden behind spreading rain clouds. I had walked nearly all the way home when I realized I had forgotten my skates. So I turned around and went back. I wasn't sure how late the library stayed open. Mr. Mortman had seemed to be entirely alone in there. I hoped he hadn't decided to close up shop early. I really didn't want to leave my new skates in there overnight. I stopped and stared up at the old library. Deep in the shade, it seemed to stare back at me, its dark windows like black, unblinking eyes. I climbed the stone steps, then hesitated with my hand on the door. I had a sudden chill. Was it just from stepping into the deep shade? No, it was something else. I had a funny feeling. A bad feeling. I get those sometimes. A signal. A moment of unease. Like something bad is about to happen. Shaking it off. pushed open the creaking old door and stepped into the musty darkness of the library. Shadows danced across the wall as I made my way to the main room. A tree branch tapped noisily against the dust-covered pane of a high window. The library was silent except for the creaking floorboards beneath my sneakers. As I entered the main room, I could hear the steady tick-tick-tick of the wall clock. The lights had all been turned off. I thought I felt something scamper across my shoe. A mouse. I stopped short and glanced down. Just a dust ball clinging to the base of a bookshelf. Oh, whoa, Lucy, I scolded myself. It's just a dusty old library. Nothing to get weird about. Don't let your wild imagination take off and lead you into trouble. Trouble? I still had that strange feeling. A gentle but insistent gnawing at my stomach. A tug at my chest. Something isn't right. Something bad is about to happen. People call them premonitions. It's a good vocabulary word for what I was feeling right then. I found my skates where I had left them, against the wall back in the stacks. I grabbed them up, eager to get out of that dark, creepy place. I headed quickly back toward the entrance, tiptoeing for some reason, but a sound made me stop. I held my breath and listened. It was just a cough. Peering down the narrow aisle, I could see Mr. Mortman hovered over his desk. Well, actually, I could just see part of him, one arm and some of his face when he leaned to the left. I was still holding my breath. The clock ticked noisily from across the room. Behind his desk, Mr. Mortman's face moved in and out of the blue-purple shadows. The skates suddenly felt heavy. I lowered them silently to the floor. Then my curiosity got the better of me, and I took a few steps toward the front. Mr. Mortman began humming to himself. I didn't recognize the song. The shadows grew deeper as I approached. Peering down the dark aisle, I saw him holding a large glass jar between his pudgy hands. I was close enough to see that he had a pleasant smile on his face. Keeping in the shadows, I moved closer. I like spying on people. It's kind of thrilling, even when they don't do anything very interesting. Just knowing that you're watching them and they don't know they're being watched is exciting. Humming to himself, Mr. Mortman held the jar in front of his chest and started to unscrew the top. Some juicy flies, my timid friends, he announced in his high-pitched voice. So, the jar was filled with flies. Suddenly, the room grew much darker as clouds rolled over the late afternoon sun. The light from the window dimmed. Gray shadows rolled over Mr. Mortman and his enormous desk, as if blanketing him in darkness. From my hidden perch among the shelves, I watched him prepare to feed his turtles. But wait, something was wrong. My premonition was coming true. Something weird was happening. As he struggled to unscrew the jar lid, Mr. Mortman's face began to change. His head floated up from his turtleneck and started to expand like a balloon being inflated. I uttered a silent gasp as I saw his tiny eyes poke out of his head. The eyes bulged bigger and bigger until they were as big as doorknobs. The light from the window grew even dimmer. The entire room was cast in heavy shadows. The shadows swung and shifted. I couldn't see well at all. It was like I was watching everything through a dark fog. Mr. Mortman continued to hum, even as his head bobbed and throbbed above his shoulders, and his eyes bulged out as if on stems, poking straight up like insect antennae. And then his mouth began to twist and grow, and opened wide like a gaping black hole on the enormous body. Mr. Mortman sang louder now, an eerie, frightening sound, more like animal howling than singing. He pulled off the lid of the jar and let it fall to the desk. It clanged loudly as it hit the desktop. forward, struggling to see. Squinting hard, I saw Mr. Mortman dip his fat hand into the jar. I could hear loud buzzing from the jar. He pulled out a handful of flies. I could see his eyes bulge even wider. I could see the gaping black hole that was his mouth. He held his hand briefly over the turtle cage. I could see the flies, black dots all over his hand, in his palm, on his short, stubby fingers. I thought he was going to lower his hand to the aluminum pan. I thought he was going to feed the turtles. But instead, he jammed the flies into his own mouth. I shut my eyes and held my hand over my mouth to keep from puking or screaming. I held my breath, but my heart kept racing. The shadows lurched and jumped. The darkness seemed to float around me. I opened my eyes. He was eating another handful of flies, sticking them into his gaping mouth with his fingers, swallowing them whole. I wanted to shout. I wanted to run. Mr. Mortman, I realized, was a monster. The shadows seemed to pull away. The sky outside the window brightened, and a gray triangle of light fell over Mr. Mortman's desk. Opening my eyes, I realized I'd been holding my breath. My chest felt as if it were about to burst. I let the air out slowly and took another deep breath. Then, without glancing again to the front of the room, I bolted out the front door of the library onto the stone steps, then down the gravel driveway. I ran as fast as I could, my arms flying wildly at my sides, my black hair blowing behind me. I didn't stop until I was a block away. Then I dropped to the curb and waited for my heart to stop pounding like a bass drum. Heavy rain clouds rolled over the sun again. The sky became an eerie yellow-black. A station wagon rolled past. Some kids in the back of it called to me, but I didn't raise my head. I kept seeing the shadowy scene in the library again and again. Mr. Mortman is a monster. The words repeated nonstop in my mind. It can't be, I thought, gazing up at the black clouds so low overhead. I was seeing things. That had to be it. All the shadows in the dark library, all the swirling darkness. It was an optical illusion. It was my wild imagination. It was a daydream, a silly fantasy. No, a loud voice in my head cried. No, Lucy, you saw Mr. Mortman's head bulge. You saw his eyes pop out and grow like hideous toadstools on his ballooning face. You saw him reach into the fly jar. You heard him humming so happily, so hungrily. You saw him jam the flies into his mouth. Not one handful, but two. And maybe he's still in there, eating his fill. It was dark, Lucy. There were shadows, but you saw what you saw. You saw it all. Mr. Mortman is a monster. I climbed to my feet. I felt a cold drip of rain on top of my head. Mr. Mortman is a monster. I said it out loud. I knew I had to tell Mom and Dad as fast as I could. The librarian is a monster. That's what I'd tell them. Of course they'll be shocked. Who wouldn't be? Feeling another raindrop on my head, then one on my shoulder, I started jogging for home. I had gone about half a block when I stopped. The stupid skates. I had left them in the library again. I turned back. A gust of wind blew my hair over my face. I pushed it back with both hands. I was thinking hard, trying to figure out what to do. Rain pattered softly on the pavement of the street. The cold raindrops felt good on my hot forehead. I decided to go back to the library and get my skates. This time, I'd make a lot of noise, make sure Mr. Mortman knew someone was there. If he heard me coming, I decided he'd act normal. He wouldn't eat flies in front of me. He wouldn't let his eyes bulge and his head grow. kept reassuring myself all the way up to the dark old building. I climbed the stone steps hesitantly, then, taking a deep breath, I grabbed the doorknob and started to go in. I realized that it was locked. The library was closed. The rain pattered softly on the grass as I walked around to the front window. It was high off the ground. I had to pull myself up on the window ledge to look inside. Darkness. Total darkness. I felt relieved and disappointed at the same time. I wanted my skates, but I didn't really want to go back in there. I'll get them tomorrow, I said out loud. I lowered myself to the ground. The rain was setting to. The wind was picking up, blowing the rain in sheets. I started to run, my sneakers squishing over the wet grass. I ran all the way home. I was totally drenched by the time I made my way through the front door. My hair was matted down on my head. My t-shirt was soaked through. Mom, Dad, are you home? I cried. I ran through the hallway, nearly slipping on the smooth floor, and burst into the kitchen. A monster, I cried. Huh. Randy was seated at the kitchen table, snapping a big pile of string beans for Mom. He was the only one who looked up. Mom and Dad were standing at the counter, rolling little meatballs in their hands. They didn't even turn around. A monster, I screamed again. Where? Randy cried. Did you get caught in the rain? Mom asked. Don't you say hi? Dad asked. Do you just explode into a room yelling, don't I get a hi, Dad, or anything? Hi, Dad, I cried breathlessly. There's a monster in the library. Lucy, please. Mom started impatiently. What kind of monster? Randy asked. He had stopped snapping the ends off the beans and was staring hard at me. Mom finally turned around. You're soaked, she cried. You're dripping all over the floor. Get upstairs and change into dry clothes. Dad turned too, a frown on his face. Your mother just washed the floor, he muttered. I'm trying to tell you something, I shouted, raising my fist in the air. No need to scream, Mom scolded. Get changed, then tell us. But Mr. Mortman is a monster, I cried. Can't you save the monster stuff till later? I just got home and I've got the worst headache, Dad complained. His eyes stared down at the kitchen floor. Me on the white linoleum. I'm serious, I insisted. Mr. Mortman, he's really a monster. Randy laughed. He's funny looking. Randy, it's not nice to make fun of people's looks, Mom said, crossly. She turned back to me. See what you're teaching your little brother. Can't you set a good example? But, Mom, Lucy, please get into dark clothes, Dad pleaded. Then come down and set the table, okay? I was so frustrated. I tilted my head back and uttered an angry groan. Doesn't anyone here believe me? I cried. This really isn't the time for your monster stories, Mom said, turning back to our meatballs. Larry, you're making them too big. She scolded my father. They're supposed to be small and delicate. But I like big meatballs, Dad insisted. And no one was paying any attention to me. I turned and stomped angrily out of the kitchen. Is Mr. Mortman really a monster? Randy called after me. I don't know and I don't care about anything, I screamed back. I was just so angry and upset. They didn't have to ignore me like that. All they cared about were their stupid meatballs. Up in my room, I pulled off my wet clothes and tossed them on the floor. I changed into jeans and a tank top. Is Mr. Mortman really a monster? Randy's question repeated in my head. Did I imagine the whole thing? Do I just have monsters on the brain? It had been so dark and shadowy in the library, with all the lights turned off. Maybe Mr. Mortman didn't eat the flies. Maybe he pulled them out of the jar and fed them to his pet turtles. Maybe I imagined that he ate them. Maybe his head didn't swell up like a balloon. Maybe his eyes didn't pop out. Maybe that was was just a trick of the darkness, the dancing shadows, the dim gray light. Maybe I needed glasses. Maybe I'm crazy and weird. Lucy hurried down and set the table. My dad called up the stairs. Okay, coming. As I made my way downstairs, I felt all mixed up. I didn't mention Mr. Mormon at dinner. Actually, Mom brought him up. What book did you choose to read this week? She asked. Frankenstein, I told her. Dad groaned. More monsters, he cried, shaking his head. Don't you ever get enough monsters? You see them wherever you go. Do you have to read about monsters too? Dad has a big, booming voice. Everything about my dad is big. He looks very tough with a broad chest and powerful-looking arms. When he shouts, the whole house shakes. Randy, you did a great job with the string beans, Mom said, quickly taking the subject. After dinner, I helped Dad with the dishes. Then I went upstairs to my room to start reading Frankenstein. I'd seen the old movie, Frankenstein, on TV, so I knew what it was about. It was about a scientist who builds a monster and the monster comes to life. It sounded like my kind of story. I wondered if it was true. To my surprise, I found Randy in my room, sitting on my bed waiting for me. What do you want? I asked. I really don't like him messing around in my room. Tell me about Mr. Mormon, he said. I could tell by his face that he was scared and excited at the same time. I sat down on the edge of the bed. I realized I was eager to tell someone about what had happened in the library. So I told Randy the whole story, starting with how I had to go back there because I'd left my skates. Randy was squeezing my pillow against his chest and breathing really hard. The story got him pretty scared, I guess. I was just finishing the part where Mr. Mormon stuffed a handful of flies into his mouth. Randy gasped. He looked sick. Lucy, my dad burst angrily into the room. What is your problem? Nothing, Dad. How many times do we have to tell you not to frighten Randy with your silly monster stories? Silly, I shrieked. But Dad, this one is true. He made a disgusted face and stood there glaring at me. I expected fire to come shooting out of his nostrils at any minute. I'm not scared, really, Randy protested, coming to my defense. But my poor brother was as white as the pillow he was holding, and trembling all over. This is your last warning, Dad said. I mean it, Lucy. I'm really angry. He disappeared back downstairs. I stared at the doorway where he'd been standing. I'm really angry too, I thought. I'm really angry that no one in this family believes me when I am being serious. I knew at that moment that I had no choice. I had to prove that I wasn't a liar. I had to prove that I wasn't crazy. I had to prove to Mom and Dad that Mr. Mormon was a monster. And you won't believe